Welcome to our professional development series, targeted for teachers of ages 0 to 18. I'm Jennifer Morgan. I'm founder and president of the Deep Time Journey Network, and I'm thrilled to bring these programs to you in cooperation with all the other trainers who have so much experience. So when I say that these programs are targeted for teachers of ages 0 to 18, let us also include teachers of all kinds, like parents, grandparents, clergy, artists, and so many more. Now, you may be saying to yourself right now, I'm so busy, I can't add even one more thing into my teaching schedule. Well, know that this lecture and all of the professional development programs we offer are more than anything about a shift in perspective and a deeper understanding of purpose. If anything, your workload will be less. It will be inspiring and joyful for both you and your students, and more effective because it's going to give your students what they want while meeting standards. All of the teacher trainers have decades of experience, and if you want further training, there are training centers listed on the network. Relax and enjoy. These presentations are for you. So, what does deep time mean? In the 18th century, geologists discovered that Earth is not thousands of years old, not even millions of years old, but billions of years old. A new term was needed to describe this hugely expanded notion of time, and geologists began to use the term deep time. Since then, cosmologists began to discover that not only is life evolving, but the whole universe is evolving and has been evolving for 14 billion years. The term deep time was expanded beyond biology and beyond the story of Earth to include all of cosmic history. What a stunning discovery! The universe itself is evolving. Our universe actually had a beginning and transformed over 14 billion years into what it is today and continues to transform. Our universe is, in some fundamental sense, about transformation. We've only known the age of the universe with any precision since 2003. This is a baby picture of our universe, revealed by WMAP, the Wilkinson Microwave Anisotropy Probe. It shows what the universe looked like at 380,000 years old. It shows a time long before stars. Yes, once upon a time, there was no Earth, and there were no stars. This picture shows the time when the very first element, hydrogen, one proton, one electron, was forming. All the hydrogen in the universe today was made in the beginning. You can't make hydrogen anymore. It's not hot enough. When I show this picture to children, they ask, how do you have a picture of the universe from so long ago, when humans weren't there? WMAP selected the most ancient light. That's the light with the longest wavelength. And from that, they were able to create this picture, which shows how the universe looked near the beginning. Everything that exists today, every plant, animal, rock, and flea, and all of our children came out of this very same beginning. Yes, it takes 14 billion years to make a child. Look all around you and you see the story of the universe. Water is made of H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. Every bit of hydrogen was created in the early universe. The oxygen was created inside the burning furnaces of stars that took bunches of hydrogen and baked them into all the elements that would one day make life possible. Breathe in oxygen, and you breathe in an ancient star. As Brian Swim said, the stars are our ancestors. It's not just a poetic idea, it's real. All the calcium in our bones and the carbon in every synapse in our brains were also formed inside the burning furnaces of a star that exploded in a massive supernova, blasting its stardust off into space. Each bit of calcium and carbon that would one day become us and everything else was once inside a star. The cells in our bodies, every single one, are directly descended from ancient single-cell organisms that first came to life inside the sea. Light-sensitive molecules in our eyes were developed billions of years before there were eyes. Our three-part brain has reptile, early mammal, and late mammal parts that were developed through evolution. Our rotating shoulder was developed by primates in trees. And our wild and dazzling dreams, don't they also come out of a universe with a wild and dazzling imagination? Just look at the grand narrative of the universe to see the clouds of hydrogen turned into the spectacular diversity of stars and all forms of life, not to mention, as Brian Swim says, symphonies and the poetry of Shakespeare. A huge change in our perspective about the universe is underway. The universe is not, as we used to think, a platform on which humans are placed, with the humans coming from somewhere else, plunked down on a static platform that doesn't change. Rather, humans come out of the universe and are the universe in human form. Everything, ants, tables, chairs, cathedrals, spaceships, and rocks, are the universe in that form. Inside this new perspective, a radical separation, as Thomas Berry called it, between humans and all of nature no longer exists. So now I'm going to tell you a story from my second book, From Lava to Life, that demonstrates some ways in which the universe evolves. In the professional development series, I will do a session on storytelling, and I'll talk about props and voice and much more. This story I'm going to tell now is to give you a moment to enter into and experience deep time while seeing patterns for how the universe evolves. These extraordinary illustrations are by Dana Lynn Anderson. This particular story I'm going to tell is about the beginning of life and the beginning of a kind of partnership that made you and me and all multicellular organisms possible. At the end, I'm just going to be silent for just a few seconds. Observe what comes to you during that silence. These stories are targeted for the elementary level, but they can be used for all levels. This story is in the voice of the universe. Yep, we've got a first-person account here. And I'm going to start with a thunder tube so we can get into the mood. So stop cooking the pasta or brushing your teeth or whatever multitasking you're doing right now and settle in because we're headed into deep time. Are you ready to head into deep time? Here we go. My dear Earthlings, now I get to tell you the story of the beginning of life and how a really important partnership got started. Once upon a time, your Earth was born. It was born when dust came together and formed boulders, and then the boulders crashed together, and then more and more and more crashed together, until finally your Earth had cleaned up its orbit. Yes, that's when a planet is formed, when it cleans up its orbit. That's when it stops getting bigger. Now, after a time, Earth was covered with volcanoes, and the volcanoes spewed out gases that went up and formed the atmosphere, and they spewed out moisture that went up and formed the clouds. Over time, Earth began to cool down, and it started to rain, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained for 1,000,000 years. It was the great rain, and it covered your Earth with oceans. Now, underneath the oceans, there were cracks in the ocean floor, and there were little bubbles filled with hydrogen gurgling up from the ocean floor. Remember hydrogen, my first element, created when I was born 14 billion years ago? Well, there it was, bubbling up from the ocean floor. Then something amazing happened. Little things began to appear in the ocean. These little things began to twist and turn, not only when waves crashed or lightning flashed, but on their own. The very first living things were coming to life. They were the very first earthlings. Yes, I'm talking about bacteria. Their DNA floated loosely around the entire cell. They could release that DNA into the water, and another could come by and pick it up, or they could directly send their DNA from one to another. That's how they spread the news around about different lifestyles, like, how to live inside of volcanoes or inside of ice. It was their form of the very first World Wide Web. These first earthlings ate the hydrogen in those bubbles that were gurgling up from the ocean floor. Then Earth started to cool down, and that was bad because there weren't as many hydrogen bubbles. There wasn't as much hydrogen around for the early earthlings to eat. What was going to happen? Then a whole new kind of life began to appear. This new kind of life discovered a new source of hydrogen. It was inside the stuff they were swimming through. Yes, it's inside the water. Water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen. Some of those early earthlings figured out how to take energy from the sun and use it to break apart water molecules so they could eat the hydrogen. Yes, those first earthlings to figure this out were the photosynthesizers, the very ancestors of plants. But plants are a long way off in the future. Let's get back to the story. These are the ancestors of plants. And they are single-cell organisms. And they lived in mounds, like their own cities, really, along the seashore. Now, those photosynthesizers were wizards, to be sure. I mean, to figure out how to take energy from the sun and break water molecules, that's just incredible. But a terrible thing started to happen. Every time they broke apart a water molecule to get at the hydrogen, oxygen was released into the atmosphere. And oxygen was a poison to life back then. Life was so different back then, my dear human earthlings, so different from what it is today. Yes, oxygen was a poison to early life on Earth. And life began to die everywhere. What was going to happen? Things didn't get better. In fact, they got worse. A whole new kind of life began to show up in the oceans. This new kind of life didn't eat hydrogen out of bubbles. It didn't take energy from the sun. No, this new kind of life, well, it ate other living things. These were heterotrophs. They ate other living things. They would engulf others or sneak inside someone else and then digest their guts from the inside. Yuck! My dear human earthlings, you ate your oatmeal this morning, which used to be oats growing in a field, and maybe you had a hamburger for dinner last night. The things you eat used to be living. You are heterotrophs too. And these are your ancestors. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves. Once again, I'm always doing that. Let's get back to the story. Well, one time, two heterotrophs were trying to digest each other. One tried to engulf the other, and then the other tried to engulf that one. But something incredible happened. The two combined and turned into a whole new kind of life. I'm talking about eukaryotes. Eukaryotes. Two single-cell bacteria had morphed into a single eukaryote with a nucleus, a packet inside the cell where the DNA is stored. What would that make possible? That was really cool. But it still didn't help the huge problem, which was that the oxygen atmosphere was causing life to die everywhere. No, the eukaryotes couldn't handle the oxygen. They were dying too. What was going to happen? Then a whole new kind of life began to appear in the ocean. Oxygen didn't poison this new kind of life, no. These new earthlings loved oxygen. They burned the oxygen and created power out of that oxygen. Yeah, they were tiny whippersnappers, but they were very mighty. You can see those tiny whippersnappers swimming around in the lower left of the picture. They kind of look like fingerprints. Who are they? I'm talking about the mighty mitochondria. Well, one day, a eukaryote engulfed some mitochondria. You can see it in the lower left and then moving toward the upper right of the picture. But instead of digesting the mitochondria began to live inside the eukaryote and to provide energy for the eukaryote and itself. The mitochondria could breathe for the eukaryote. It was cleaning up the oxygen poison inside the eukaryotic cell and providing power for the eukaryote. It was the beginning of a partnership that would make possible the evolution of animals. And eventually, in another 2 billion years, it would make it possible for you to appear. Right now, this very second, there are mitochondria in every one of your cells, breathing oxygen for you and making it possible for you to live in Earth's oxygen atmosphere. Do you see why I love bacteria so much? So, what is a deep time framework? for education. Children's natural curiosity propels them to ask questions about where they and everything comes from. I have given programs for thousands of children and teachers, and stories about the birth of the universe and Earth evoke profound experiences of awe and wonder. When I asked students at a recent school visit, why do you think it's important for children to understand the story of the universe? One child said, "We need to know where we live." Another child said, "Things weren't made by magic, but by time." Both were 7 years old. My own son, at age 7, wanted to know the texture of the edge of the universe. Children and all of us love to ponder these questions. So deep time education is not new. The first educator to understand the significance of an evolving universe as a primary context for education was Maria Montessori. She began to lay out her philosophy and curriculum starting in 1948 with her book, To Educate the Human Potential. She said, "It is not enough for the teacher to love the child. She must first love and understand the universe. Let us give the child a vision of the whole universe. No matter what we touch, an atom or a cell, we cannot explain it without knowledge of the wide universe." So let's look at these words, in that first quote. The teacher must first love and understand the universe. Love alone is not enough. Understanding is not enough. The two need to come together. Michael and Danielle Duffy will give you a much deeper introduction to Montessori cosmic education in their professional development program. There are many other thinkers and educators with a deep time perspective, using different names to describe this approach. Thomas Berry, Brian Swim, Mary Evelyn Tucker, John Grimm created a foundational approach calling it the universe story, new story, and new cosmology, and most recently, Journey of the Universe, as in the book and movie written and produced by Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker. Lynn Margulis, James Lovelock, and systems thinkers such as Fritjof Capra and Ilya Prigogine, and others have been important in looking at how entire systems work and looking at the patterns of evolution. David Christian, Fred Spear, and others started big history at the college and secondary level with a focus on situating human history inside the history of the cosmos. To understand the human, we need to understand where the human comes from. So in deep time education, we're connecting the dots between these different approaches, looking at how each contributes to a larger understanding and how each fits into a continuum across all age groups. These efforts are happening already. For example, Deep Time Journey Network member Kyle Herman just published on the network a manual for linking Montessori cosmic education at the elementary and middle school levels, with big history at the secondary level. In this outstanding manual, he cites many of the thinkers I mentioned. So what we're talking about in deep time education, first and foremost, is a shift in perspective. If we look at this picture, we can see that it's a piece of something. We see a flat design. It might be a rug. It might be fur. We're not sure. It doesn't have movement, and we don't see the whole. If we shift our perspective and see the whole, we might see that it's fur on a leopard. We can watch its movement. We can learn where it comes from, what it eats, its friends, its habitat. The leopard begins to take on more dimensions in space and time. It begins to have a story. We begin to have a relationship. And we might even become bonded with the leopard. Similarly, for many of us, the universe is like this, a patch of stars in the sky that we might occasionally look at beyond the buildings around us. We don't think about the universe much. For most of us, it's a flat picture, distant, and doesn't enter into our consciousness. Deep time expands the universe into a multi-dimensional reality. We get to know its story. We see patterns. We bond with this huge picture, and we see ourselves inside of it. So what are some principles of deep time education? I'm going to name a few, and it's important to note that these principles themselves are evolving. A first principle centers around the word primary. The universe is primary, Thomas Berry said. It's the context and foundation of everything. Everything is derived out of and is the universe being that thing. To understand anything, we need to understand the universe because it's the container and the matrix of everything. If we don't understand what's primary, then what do we know? What is the universe? What does it do? And how do we come into relationship with it? To do that, we need to know its story. And science is handing us a stunning story of cosmic evolution. What does this mean for education? Jane Ritterford and Rod Sugden, two trainers in England, who will give a professional development program in our series, said it well. And they said about their own development as educators, we moved from teaching the universe story as an add-on to teaching it as the foundation. In deep time education, we move from teaching about the universe as, let's say, a single lesson about the solar system and then rarely talk about it again, to relating everything to the universe as the largest context and foundation. So what does that mean in the classroom? It means that we relate everything to a transdisciplinary context, as Tracy Sullivan, a big history researcher in Australia, writes about so beautifully in her essay on the subject, which is available on the network. The progression in education, she says, has been to move from teaching subjects in silos, so like these unrelated silos, moving from that to an interdisciplinary approach, where let's say two subjects are related to each other, or maybe more than two are related to each other. But now our next step in evolution of education is to move to a transdisciplinary approach in which all subjects fit into the larger context of an evolving universe. Montessori cosmic education has been using a transdisciplinary approach since the 1940s, calling it a whole to detail approach. What is the scaffolding for this transdisciplinary approach? It's being done in different ways at different levels. Michael and Danielle Duffy will talk a lot more about the Montessori approach in their introduction to Montessori cosmic education. So will Dr. Betsy Coe and Ann Sutton in their professional development session. Kyle Herman will talk about the scaffolding at the intersection between Montessori cosmic education and big history. The important thread for all approaches is that each subject fits on a larger framework and is taught inside the context of evolution. So in the case of Montessori cosmic education, there are nested stories, starting with the biggest story, which is the story of the universe, in which physics leads to chemistry. So we see where the elements come from. Everything has a story, everything has a history, everything comes from somewhere. The story of life, then, is nested inside the story of the universe. So we move into the subjects of biology and geology, the story of Earth. The third story is the story of humans. So we move into anthropology. Then there's the story of communication. And here, this one focuses on human communication because this is where, reading and writing, music, symbolic thinking in all its different forms come in. But it's not to say that there isn't non-human communication. There's lots of it. And the more we learn, there's a lot more communicating going on. And then the story of math is nested inside of that prior story because it's a kind of communication, kind of symbolic communication. So all the subjects have a home inside of this framework of nested levels. Kyle Herman is going to talk a lot more about the big history approach, and actually I think Michael and Danielle will as well. And that approach has to do with thresholds that the universe moves through. And then all subjects can be related to the thresholds. I'm not going to go into that here. So what's the outcome of a transdisciplinary approach? Everything fits together and belongs. Imagine that. Everything fits together and belongs. There's nothing that doesn't belong. And we can see how it all works together. So we move from a fragmented picture to an integrated whole. We see the big picture. So a second principle has to do with this word, emergence. As we learn more about the universe, so as we study this grand narrative, and we see how the universe transforms into surprising and novel things, we see that it does through a process of emergence. That is, each new thing comes out of what existed before. And it does so in a certain way. Complicated things emerge out of the relationships of simpler things. To say it another way, larger entities and patterns can arise through interactions among smaller or simpler entities that don't exhibit the properties that can be seen in the larger entities. For example, cells with a nucleus, the story that I just told. The eukaryotes in the story emerged out of two different kinds of bacteria, which don't have a nucleus. The properties that emerged from that interaction enabled the evolution of multicellular organisms. Going beyond biology, we see the same dynamic at all levels, even down to the atomic and subatomic level. We see it going all the way up into human history and organizations. As organizations become more complex through coupling and nesting of relationships, which give rise to new properties that make new things possible that were never possible before that. The universe is a story of destruction and spectacular creation that has a tendency toward increasing complexity. Inside of deep time education, our students see the drama of the universe and the drama of their own lives. They understand that their own lives are part of a great cosmic adventure, far greater than Harry Potter or any video game. Reality itself is the most incredible undertaking of all. Our own personal experience of chaos somehow takes on meaning inside this larger context of a turbulent and creative universe. And that leads us to a third principle: transformation. We're talking here about inner transformation. An evolving universe evokes awe and wonder. And awe and wonder is the gateway to our own transformation and fulfillment. Isn't it amazing that the experiences we so crave, those of awe and wonder, are exactly what the universe, reality itself, can evoke? We are stunned by the magnitude of what we're part of. I remember a small boy saying to me during a school visit, "I can't believe how big the universe is and how small we are. I can't believe how big the universe is and how small we are." He kept saying it over and over. Kyle Herman, in one of his papers, says, The perspective big history offers is both humbling and valorizing, typically in that order. First comes a feeling of an almost embarrassing smallness, a real blow to the ego, and yet the next feeling rushing in behind it is just the opposite. The self extends outward, expanding like the universe, and the identity becomes renewed, wider, and bigger, and all the more significant. As one student writes, I'm bad at appreciating myself. And I'm not trying to make this some kind of sob story or anything, but knowing that I am, in a way, formed from, by stars, makes me feel more important. If there is one thing that we should aim for in secondary education, Kyle goes on to say, it should be to help adolescents feel more important, or rather, to help them see how important they really are. Montessori calls this experience valorization, and though not a term explicitly used in big history, it happens quite naturally when we find ourselves at home in the universe. We experience the grandeur and commonwealth of being. This naturally ignites our imagination of future possibilities and leads us to cooperation, the very ingredients for emergence. Remember, emergence is about bringing forth something new out of existing relationships. What is waiting to emerge now? How can our lives be part of emergence? Inside of a deep time framework, we can reflect and have the very best foundation for good decision making because we understand how evolution works and we understand the processes of Earth. The outcome of this principle is passion, place, and purpose. Passion, or a zest for life, as Teilhard de Chardin called it. Place, an understanding of where we are in space and time, the completely unique place we occupy that has never been occupied before and will never be again. We really understand where we are in the deep time story. And we have a sense of purpose. We know we have something to contribute. We have a role to play, something to give to the larger context. And that leads to a fourth principle, participation. We participate in emergence. We participate in breakthroughs and bringing forth the new. Isn't this the story of every hero? The story of chaos, struggle, breakthrough, and bringing forth the new. Isn't it amazing that the universe itself has followed this very pattern from the beginning? In a sense, deep time education is about nurturing deep time heroes, not heroes who act alone, but who act in partnership, not only with other human beings, but also with all of life and our whole planet, with an understanding of how the universe evolves and an understanding of our Earth. We come into what Thomas Berry called a mutually enhancing relationship with Earth. Our inner transformation has been awakened, and we act by participating in evolution with the larger creative powers of the universe to create a vibrant world. We enter into the deep time journey, or as Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker call it, the journey of the universe. And a fifth principle has to do with this word continuum. All of education in this framework is about getting to know what we're part of, an evolving universe. So what does that look like as a continuum across all the different levels? Dr. Betsy Coe and Ann Sutton will talk a lot more about this in their program, about cosmic education as a continuum across all levels. In brief, children ages 0 to 6 get to know the universe through the senses, through taste, touch, hearing, seeing. Spending lots of time in nature and playing awakens them to the universe and a world of wonder. They live in the present moment, experiencing what's right in front of them. Then a huge shift happens as the child enters the next phase, ages 6 to 12. Now the child can conceptualize the past and future. They want to know, where did everything come from? Where is it going? In this phase, children are eager to learn the great stories of the universe. From ages 12 to 18, children now have the big picture, and they move towards seeing more clearly themselves inside that big picture. It's a huge development for them. They yearn to know how they fit in and what their contributions can be. Adolescents in this phase are longing for transcendence, to see and experience themselves as part of something larger than themselves. And if they don't get it inside culturally sanctioned ways, they will find it through other ways that can be destructive. This is why it's so important to give them what they yearn for and what helps them to fulfill their potential. So, what is your journey inside of the deep time journey? Take a moment now to reflect on yourself. What do you do every day? Write down 3 words, the words that are most meaningful to you, that describe what you do in your life. Now look at those words. How do these activities contribute to evolution or to emergence, the bringing forth of the new? Did you help a child to experience awe and wonder, or an adolescent to know how important they are? What are the ripple effects of these moments inside of deep time? Deep time education is less about doing different things and much more about doing them with a consciousness of deep time, seeing how each moment fits into and contributes to the arc of an evolving universe. We become present to the magnificence of deep time, which is unfolding every single moment. So I just want to take a second to say a little bit about the programs inside the professional development series that we're offering on the network. The first one, of course, that's what you just heard. The second one, An Introduction to Montessori Cosmic Education with Michael and Danielle Duffy, which is going to give you a great overview. Michael and Danielle wrote the book Children of the Universe, which is used in elementary classrooms around the world. The next one, Cosmic Education as a Continuum Across All Levels, with Betsy Coe and Ann Sutton. We've mentioned that a few times. How to Meet Standards and Give Your Students the Universe, with Linda Aquist. This, of course, is a huge concern, particularly inside of public schools. And Linda's going to talk about how you can do that. Unrolling the Scroll of Life, Making Your Own Materials. Anne Rose Gavey has made these beautiful fabrics for timelines. So how you can make your own materials. She'll be talking about that. Deep Time Education in a K-8 public school, non-Montessori, with Tracy Panulo and members of the Ridge and Valley Charter School community. This is in Blairstown, New Jersey. And this school community developed their entire curriculum from K-8 based on the work of Thomas Berry and Brian Swim. Cosmos and Gaia, Education and Emergence of a New Human, with Dr. Phil Snow Gang. He has been teaching a master's program and is dean of a master's program at Endicott College, specifically for teachers. And that's a fascinating lecture. Deep Time Storytelling for All Ages, that's with me, and I'll go into lots of different aspects of storytelling, specifically deep time storytelling, and how you can find your own unique way to do deep time storytelling. Empowering your student to tell the story, with Gwen Shangle. So once the students know the story, then they really integrate it once they can tell it themselves. And the next one, Big History in Montessori Adolescent Programs. I've referred to that several times. That'll be with Kyle Herman. And then Exploring the Universe Story Through Myth and Ritual. That'll be with Jane Ritterford and Rod Sugden. They're in London. And they've been doing remarkable work through a summer camp, and also with a number of schools in London. There's lots more information on the network. And I just want to mention each of these upcoming programs will have a webcast and a live Q&A, and then a forum discussion. And they all offer 2 professional development hours, which are recognized by the American Montessori Society and by most public and private schools. Want to give a huge thanks to our sponsors for this series: the Germeshausen Foundation, Priscilla Spears of Big Picture Science, Mary Coelho, Dr. Phil Snow Gang, Orla and Sanat Hazra, Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, Susan Curry, the Princeton Center for Teacher Education, Montessori Services, the Guild, and Dr. Betsy Coe of the Houston Montessori Center. So thank you so much for joining in this session. And I look forward to seeing you on the network and communicating with you. And please do write to me at the network with your suggestions, and sign up for these other programs. And I am so looking forward to being in touch with you and enlarging this community. Thank you.